The three biggest fears of the ruling families. Only 1% of the world's population of over 6 billion people is controlling the other 99%. That 1% owns the world's banks and most of the world's wealth, land and resources. So why does everybody accept and passively cooperating with this injustice? Because the wealthy 1% who make the rules have taught the other 99% to obey them, and to feel powerless to change things. When people feel powerless, they cling to passive attitudes. Like ignorance is bliss, things are not that bad, or let God take care of everything. Before choosing a passive attitude, remember that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. Despite all the red flags, many people deny that a problem even exists. It does exist, and the good news is there are solutions. The solutions lie in knowing what the three biggest fears of the ruling families are. The first biggest fear is exposure. They have gone to great lengths to cover up their trail of crimes and to win the public's trust through their media monopolies. Without public trust, their ancestral plan for global control is doomed. Their second biggest fear is losing public support. If the public stops cooperating, their plan is guaranteed to fail. Their third biggest fear is organized resistance, by an informed and fearless public. The ruling families know from past experience that the will of the people can defeat all their military and monetary might. Vietnam was a perfect example. There is no doubt that these ruling families can be totally defeated by turning their three worst fears into a reality. Solution number 1 is exposing the ruling families and their generations of horrific crimes against humanity. The most powerful form of advertising is word of mouth. Share information, talk about it, name names, recommend books, videos and websites. Form your own study group and solutions group. Share websites and books, show videos, films and DVDs. Raise money, give money, organize, lobby, email and do whatever you can to stop the madness. Millions of people around the world who protested the invasion of Iraq learned a hard lesson. They learned that peaceful protests don't work. Since the Committee of 300 created think tanks to mastermind the plan for global control, citizens must also create think tanks to mastermind the plan to stop them. Learn who the past and present members of the Committee of 300 are. At the top of the list are the royal families of Britain and Denmark, the international banking families and the affiliated political families. Find time to research and read about the Committee of 300. Dig beneath the hype and propaganda and share your information. Solution number 2 is to take back control of your own money. Right now your money is in the hands of the ruling families who own all of the world's banks, including the privatized central banks. How did they get to be so powerful? It started with the very first banks. In the beginning, banks were a safe place for people to store their gold. When the bankers discovered that people left most of their gold in the bank for safekeeping, they started lending out the gold that didn't belong to them and charging usury, interest on it. Soon, kings and royalty were borrowing gold from the bankers to finance wars. Since wars were extremely good for business, the bankers started stirring up conflicts that lead to more wars. Then they lent money out to both sides of the wars and collected huge interest rates. Eventually the bankers got so rich that they built banks all over the world. They made millions in interest just by loaning out other people's money that didn't belong to them. They bought mansions and fancy clothes and hosted extravagant parties. The royal families of Europe became the bankers' biggest customers, who rewarded them with high society titles, like Lord and Baron and Sir. Using their money and royal influence, the bankers changed the laws of nations, so they could put the world's central banks, mints and money supplies into private hands, their private hands. Out of every $1,000 that their customers deposited with the banks, they kept only $100 on hand. They took the rest of their customers' money and made loans with it, invested it and started up other businesses. Like the steel business, to create rails for their railroad companies, to transport oil for their oil companies. Pretty soon the bankers' new businesses grew into giant corporations. Those giant corporations turned the world's oceans, lakes, rivers, air and soil into polluted corporate toilets. When profits from all their oil, Mining and drug company monopoly soared, the bankers became the world's richest men, but their greed had no limits. They wanted to own the entire world, so they put their heads together and came up with an ingenious scheme to take control of all the world's money and riches. Using their media corporations, they launched a gigantic advertising campaign. They told people they no longer had to save their money and wait for all the things they wanted in life. They could have everything they ever dreamed of, right now. All they needed was a shiny plastic card. People rushed to fill up their wallets with shiny plastic cards instead of money. Like lottery winners, they went on drunken buying sprees and bought everything in sight. All the things they couldn't afford. Nobody even noticed when their hard-earned paychecks were automatically deposited in the bank, without ever being cashed. Then people's bills, fines, taxes and purchases were automatically deducted from their accounts, and paying by check quickly became unfashionable. Eventually, money was phased out altogether and replaced by units of credit, which were really nothing more than numbers on a computer screen. The next thing the bankers did was replace people's plastic cards with their newest invention, implantable personal electronic identification devices. These devices contained all of a person's private information, including their credit information. Since having this device was like having an invisible ID and debit card, and since nobody could steal it from you, everybody rushed to get one. All people had to do to buy whatever they wanted in life was to scan their personal identification device over a scanner in a shop, and so the power for people to buy their most basic necessities in life fell completely into the hands of the bankers. Suddenly, people couldn't buy food, medicine, or even a cup of coffee without scanning their identification device. Eventually, people sobered up from their drunken spending sprees. They realized they had traded their hard-earned money for a bunch of numbers on a computer screen. Their real money had become virtually unreal. Not only did the bankers own all of the world's money, they now had the power to delete a person's lifetime of savings. But why would these friendly bankers do such a thing? To force people's cooperation. This futuristic scenario isn't as futuristic as it sounds. Personal identification devices with all of a person's personal information, including their credit information, have already been developed. So, what can you do to take control over your money, before the bankers take control over the world's money system? Withdraw your money from their banks. By putting your money into their banks, you are enriching and empowering them with control over your money and eventually over your life. Cut up your credit and debit cards. Pay only with cash, money order, or certified check. People are under the illusion that their money is safe in the banks and that the bankers are honest. The truth is, the money you put in their banks isn't really there. Although there hasn't been a global economic crash since the 1930s, another crash could happen at any time, and without warning. Economic crashes don't just happen, they are made to happen. Economic booms and busts are controlled by how much money the bankers put in circulation, through their loans and interest rates. People believe that Alan Greenspan, who announces U.S. interest rates, works for the Fed and that the Fed is a part of the U.S. government. The Fed is not part of the U.S. government. The Fed is the privately owned U.S. Federal Reserve banks, which are owned and controlled by the international bankers. Every day the bankers move trillions of dollars around the world's banking and financial markets. They decide if the markets go up or down, soar or crash. But why in the world would they want to crash the markets? To destroy people's confidence in the money system and create a dependent cashless society. According to the Illuminati, Zionist plan written by Adam Weishaupt and Albert Pike, the ruling class will bankrupt the middle class and repossess their private property. They will reinstate the military draft and continue disarming nations, until there is no one left to disarm. They will make it illegal to possess a firearm or any other weapon that can be used to resist them. When the crash does come, they will blame it on the phony war on terror, which they control and finance on both sides. So what else can you do to take control over your own money? Take all of your money out of the rigged stock markets and money markets. Cash in your treasury bills, bonds, and retirement savings plans. Most of the retirement funds have already been looted. Trade in your paper money for something of real value like gold, silver and precious metals and stones. So where can you put your personal valuables, besides the bank? In a personal safe, or a very good hiding place? It will prove to be much safer than the bank. It's not the neighborhood thieves you have to worry about. It's the global thieves. By keeping your hard-earned money and valuables out of the banks and stock market, you are depriving the bankers of money for their wars, weapons and mass murder. You are taking back control of your own money. You know where it is and it is available when you need it. No interest, no service charges, no bank machines. Many people are under the illusion that their money is printed by the government. Money is not printed by the government. It is printed privately by the bankers, who stamp it with their Masonic symbolism. Some community groups are creating their own system of money and buying and selling goods and services from each other, tax-free. This type of money works great. So do IOUs and the barter system. When the crash does come, the banks and all the money markets will be closed for business. If and when they reopen again, your investments will be worth next to nothing and your paper money will get you only 10 cents on the dollar. If you think you own your car, your house, or other credit purchases, an economic crash will remind you who the real owners are. Most people believe that their hard-earned tax money pays for roads, bridges, schools and other public services. The truth is that most of your tax dollars goes towards paying the national debt to the international bankers. The bankers then loan your tax money back to the government and charge interest on it, for your basic public services. Before the bombing and theft of the country of Iraq, every single citizen in America owed the bank $70,000 per citizen. It is your skyrocketing debt and your nation's skyrocketing debt to the bankers that have helped them enslave the world, and they are doing it with your money, your labor and your approval. Since the ruling families and brotherhood of wealthy insiders hide their wealth and don't pay taxes, why should you? Find ways to avoid paying tax money to the bankers. If you earn an average salary over your lifetime, you will pay the bankers more than $1 million in taxes. 3/4 of your lifetime of work pays for your government's debt to the bankers and your personal debt to the bankers on your mortgaged house, your car loan, student loans and other loans. The banker's game is all about taking your money in taxes and then loaning your money back to you again with interest. They take property taxes, fuel taxes, food taxes, clothing taxes, and dozens of other taxes and fees. Collectively, the public willingly hands over trillions of dollars annually to the bankers, by depositing money into their banks, paying taxes to their central banks, supplying labor to their corporations, buying stock in their corporations, and then spending savings in their corporate superstores. So what do the bankers do with all your money that they pocket? They bomb, rob, kill, colonize, exploit and advance their cause for global control and for your eventual enslavement. Solution number 3 is to refuse to fight the bankers' murderous wars and to stop supporting others who fight their wars. One of America's favorite slogans is support your troops, which means support them no matter what. Even if the war is a lie. Even if innocent families overseas are being bombed, murdered and crippled with your tax money. Even if your tax money is paying teenagers in uniform to die by their thousands, to die for the lie. The majority of recruited soldiers are naive, duped, unemployed teenagers who are romanced into believing they are heroes fighting for freedom. But what they are really fighting for is the wealthy ruling families who are systematically disarming the world of all weapons of resistance to their global empire. Solution number 4 is to stop voting. Most nations have 2 main political parties, which means there are only 2 candidates for the top job. One is the candidate for the very rich and the other is the candidate for the even richer. Both candidates are sponsored by the lobby groups of the ruling families. Many voters feel a need to vote for the lesser of the 2 evils. But they are still voting for evil and supporting a corrupt electoral system. When you cast a vote, you are forfeiting your personal freedom and power of self-determination and giving politicians permission to run your life and make your decisions for you. By not voting, you are denying any person or group any power over you. Solution 5 is to buy small and think big. Stop shopping at corporate superstores like Walmart, or corporate grocery chains which are owned by the ruling families and their affiliates. Buy from small businesses and farmers markets. Grow your own natural food. The bankers have been genetically modifying and patenting the food you eat, the seeds you need for growing the food, as well as animal DNA. Corporate farming that supplies meat to corporate superstores subjects animals to painful, inhumane crowding, filth, cruelty and abuse. Solution 6 is to stop donating to major charities. Most of it pays administration fees. The ruling families have set up big charities and foundations to create a friendly, charitable image of themselves and to cover up their real agenda. Big charities serve as a hiding place to launder dirty money from the drugs and weapons trade. The Queen's husband Prince Philip is the international president of the World Wildlife Fund, which is one of the worst offenders. Solution 7 is to stop identifying with a flag or national anthem. Refuse to sing praises to America's bombs bursting in the air or to Britain's gracious and noble Queen who is neither gracious or noble. Solution 8 is to refuse to recognize the illegitimate claims of the royal families to your nation's water, land, resources, railways, airlines, power companies, health plans and other publicly held assets that they have been busy privatizing while you have been sleeping. The ruling families have been stealing your nation's land and resources through corporate privatization, which means they have been buying up your nation's publicly owned property, and where is it all leading? To an eternal world empire in which the power of the ruling families can never be challenged and the earth and all living things will be owned by them and will be helplessly at their mercy. Solution 9 is to name names. Focus the blame where it belongs on the ruling families. Not on their faceless corporations. Corporations like Enron, WorldCom, Merrill Lynch and Halliburton are owned by real people with real names and real faces. The general public is deceived into believing that ordinary people who invest and buy shares in these giant corporations actually own them. Nothing could be further from the truth. The only shares that really matter are the Class A shares. All of which are owned by the ruling families. Their hand-picked lackeys who sit in for them as company directors get shuffled around like packs of slippery cards. Solution 10 is to reject the propaganda that keeps you passive. Since the ruling families view religion as the opiate of the masses, they provide funding for organized religion worldwide. Solution 11 is to stop obeying laws designed to disempower you and stop them from continuing to legislate new laws to enslave you. The success of the ruling families depends on your obedience of their laws, that they make and break at will. The only way to be able to stop the ruling families from legislating new and ever-changing laws is to enforce God's law against them. The Zionist Jews claim to be God's chosen people, but they can't be God's people if they don't keep God's law. The British Anglo-Saxon peoples, including all of their descendants, that is the Irish, Americans, and the Commonwealth nations, are true Israel, to whom God gave his commandments, his laws, statutes and judgments by which breakers of his laws were to be judged by him and not by men who could be bribed and or persuaded to turn a blind eye etc., so that there would not be one law for the rich and another for the poor. He gave his judgments, under which everyone was to be judged and treated exactly the same with no favoritism. Along with the commandments, his laws, statutes and judgments, he gave a complete and perfect economic policy. An agricultural policy which did not need to use any toxic chemical sprays or fertilizers, and a healthy balanced diet etc. He gave the British peoples, Israel, everything necessary for their guidance and well-being, so that they could live happily together in harmony with each other and with nature, so that they would want for nothing, and therefore there would be no need for crime caused by deprivation. The word British is Hebrew. Brit means the covenant. Ish means exactly the same in Hebrew as it does in English, that is, the people of. Therefore the British are the people of the covenant or the people Israel of the covenant. A covenant is a solemnly binding contract. There has only ever been one people with whom God has made a covenant and that is Israel, the British. As part of this contract God gave Israel his commandments, his laws, statutes and judgments, economic policy, agricultural policy etc. for their well-being. God's perfect laws are called the laws of liberty because they are designed to leave people perfectly free to do whatever they like, provided they keep within his laws. They are not oppressive like man-made laws which selfish men made up to suit themselves and their own desires and to force others into submission and slavery to themselves and their rules. God's laws are also the laws of true justice, not man's distorted opinions of what is justice to them. Each man's idea of justice is only what seems just to himself, and as men are unjust themselves, so is their idea of justice. So therefore there can never be true justice under man's rule. Only God is impartial, unbiased and just, and therefore his justice is justice. Under God's laws everyone is equal, and his justice cannot be bought, bent, spun, twisted or ignored. His laws guarantee freedom from oppression by selfish powerful people. In God's book, the Bible, are written his laws, statutes, judgments, economic policy, agricultural policy, etc., contained in the books of the Old Testament, and which are called Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers and Deuteronomy. These were given to Moses in Horeb, Mount Sinai, for his people, Israel, to live by forever. Matt 5, verse 17-19, along with the 2 tablets of stone on which God wrote his commandments. You all know about the 10 Commandments because you were taught about it in school. They left out the part about the laws and economic policy to keep you in the dark, so that you would not rebel against their laws and economic policies under which they rob and oppress you. They know that, if you read and understood God's laws and economic policy, you would throw man-made laws out and set yourselves free from their oppression. So they have purposely kept you in the dark from birth, so they can oppress and manipulate you and steal from you under their own laws and make themselves rich and keep you poor and drive you to crime or slavery. An employee is only a polite word for slave. When Moses came down the mountain with the 5 scroll books containing the laws, economic policy and the history and lineage of the British people back to Abraham their father, and also carrying the 2 tablets of stone on which were the commandments, the entire Israel nation swore a solemnly binding oath and contract that they would keep and do all that God had commanded to Moses forever. Exodus 19-7-8 and 24-7-8. God warned the people, through Isaiah the prophet, that if they did not keep his laws etc. and allowed selfish, greedy, evil people to alter his perfect laws, in any way, or make up their own laws, then gradually these people would become rich and others would be made poor. Then these now rich and therefore now powerful people would make up more and more laws and make the poor poorer and poorer and themselves richer and richer. He said that they would grind the faces of the poor and oppress and steal, under their illegally made laws, all the poor's share of the earth's blessings. Under God's economic policy no one could become filthy rich and no one could become very poor. There was provision that those who wanted to work harder could earn more and could enjoy the rewards of their labor. But after 50 years they had to share out everything with everyone else, thereby redistributing the wealth but not destroying it, and everyone would benefit. There has to be incentive, otherwise, like the communist system, everything grinds to a halt and collapses. Today, under selfish, rich, powerful, evil men's laws everyone else is oppressed, exactly as God said would happen. We now have people who rightfully claim to be products of this selfish, sick and evil society and who feel that they have been driven to crime to survive, exactly as God predicted. Crime is never the answer. The answer is to get rid of the illegally made, oppressive laws that made you and keep you poor. Don't get angry, get determined. Anger is negative, destructive energy, like hate, fear and aggression. The people who are at the top and are working to enslave you are blinded by their greed and desire for power and have been driven insane by it. They don't know what they are doing. Have pity on them and determinedly stand up and resist them using God's law. Convert the negative energy of resentment into positive constructive energy of determination, and peacefully and determinedly use God's law to change the system that oppresses you. If you want to change the world you will find it impossible, unless you change yourself first, because, if not, no one will listen to you. As you are a part of the world, if you change yourself you will already have changed the world a little bit because you are part of it and you have changed. Then, like a pebble thrown into a pond and the ripples reach to the edge of it, you will affect everyone you meet and they will affect others, until, like the pond, everyone will feel the effect. If everyone became a pebble the world would be better overnight. The Bible is not a religious book in the way that you understand religions with churches and ceremonies. It is a book sent by God, the king and ruler of the universe, and in it are the answers to all the ills of the world and to your own personal problems. It teaches you unselfishness, love, the right way to live, how to relate and behave towards your neighbors, how to teach your children the right values and bring them up correctly, and everything you need to know in order to live in harmony with your surroundings, both people and nature. If you know all of those things, you will find that people will like you and want to be with you. God has a job for each and every one of you. That job is to let Him teach you how to fight evil and become the very best person that you can become, so that you can help Him to put the world right, His way. You can do this best by helping Him to abolish all the false, illegal man-made laws, rules, regulations, taxes and political and religious systems that are used to oppress you and everyone else. You could never meet a greater rebel and revolutionary against the evil of this world than Christ Himself. It was the Jewish government, Sanhedrin, and their rich friends that crucified Jesus because He was considered to be a threat to their great wealth and power. He never broke any law. All He did was tell the truth and enlighten people from the darkness and lies that the government had kept them under, to keep them poor and make themselves rich. The rich are the real criminals because they have stolen the share of the poor people by fraud under their own illegally made fraudulent laws. The problem is that because of ignorance of God's laws, and being kept in the dark, the poor are in prison instead of the real criminals, the rich. The Illuminati, Zionists and the governments they control are anarchists because they refuse to keep God's laws and be governed by Him. Choosing, rather, to govern themselves and you by their illegal laws and taxes. The politicians and priests have worked together to create the false impression that Christ was a wimp in a white frock and sandals and that He was very poor. He was, in fact, a revolutionary, otherwise the rich would not have crucified Him. Jesus needed no gun or other weapon to fight evil. The only weapon He used was the greatest and most powerful weapon on earth, which is far more powerful than any gun or even nuclear weapon, the truth. Enlighten people to the perfect laws and economics of God, as opposed to the dark, evil laws made up by selfish men who are serving their father the Lord of Darkness, Satan. Then, as easily and painlessly as light vanquishes darkness, so will come, with the light, justice, love and peace of mind and peace on earth. Solution 12 is to enforce God's law and arrest the Committee of 300 ruling families for their horrific past and present crimes against humanity. Those crimes include genocidal mass murder using America's atomic and chemical weapons of mass destruction on Japanese and Vietnamese families. Hundreds of thousands of innocent human beings were burned, deformed and vaporized with taxpayers' money. The ruling family's crimes also include espionage, drug trafficking, extinction of species through environmental rape and pollution, extreme degradation, humiliation, cruelty and torture, blackmail, bribery, conspiracy, slavery, racism, mass slaughter and ethnic cleansing. Their crimes include terrorism and the planning and cover-up of 9/11 and the London July 7, 2005 bombings. There's grand theft, tax evasion, inside trading, loan sharking, smuggling, corruption, political assassinations, and the list goes on. God's law also strictly prohibits the charging of usury or interest on loans, so enforcing God's law will knock the ruling elite's power base out from under them. All the wealth that the central banks have criminally and fraudulently stolen from the people must be refunded and redistributed, fairly and equally amongst the peoples from whom they were stolen. The Committee of 300 inbred families are clever, ruthless and morally insane. Since they control the military, the weaponry and the world's wealth, who is going to arrest them for their horrific crimes and how? The world's citizens must gather together in large numbers and make citizens' arrests under God's law of each of these 300 families. Solution 13 is to get past your fears and take action. Fear is paralyzing and the ruling families know this. They use their media monopolies to fearmonger, terrorize and paralyze the masses. They say you are either with us or you are with the terrorists. Really, if you are with them, you are with the terrorists. If 300 insane families can figure out how to steal the world's power and wealth and enslave the masses under one world empire, then 300 sane families can stop them. A quote from the Hopi elders: All that we do now must be done in a sacred manner and in celebration. For we are the ones that we have been waiting for. So what are you waiting for? Solution 14 is the only plan to defeat the New World Order, which is available at jatruth.net/plan.htm. Again, it is jatruth.net/plan.htm.